repeat, does not ensure that cultural and linguistic needs of Acadians and Francophones are considered when they are admitted to long-term care facilities. So, Mr. Speaker, the department, the government needs to ensure that cultural and linguistic needs of Acadians and Francophones are considered, and I'll tell you why. Just imagine, Mr. Speaker, an elderly Francophone person who can't speak or understand one word of English, or has very little understanding of the English language. And yes, there are some of these people in our Acadian communities throughout Nova Scotia. And Mr. Speaker, my dad was one of them. Imagine being placed in a long-term care facility with unilingual staff who cannot communicate with the residents. Or yet, the residents not being able to communicate with staff. And let's not forget, who are we talking about? These are folks that could be in their 80s or 90s. Some of these folks could be hard of hearing. Some of these folks' health could be deteriorating. Some of these folks are not eating properly. Some of these folks are lonely. Some of these folks miss their communities and miss their friends and family back home. And it's a known fact that some elderlies return to their mother tongue with age. A senior who has Alzheimer's, for example, generally speaks his or her mother tongue. Now, allow me, Mr. Speaker, to share a few stories with you. Last month, I was made aware through family members that their 86-year-old mom, awaiting to be discharged from the Yarmouth Regional Hospital to a long-term care facility, was facing such a crisis. She told her family if she was placed away in a long-term care facility from her home, she would stop eating. While family members were distressed because it was out of character for her. Of course, her family told her she could not do that. If she stopped eating, she would die. But, Mr. Speaker, do you know what she replied? She stressed again to her family members that she would do just that, stop eating. Obviously, Mr. Speaker, is this right? Of course not. It's not right. For this 86-year-old lady who enjoyed life to the fullest before she was hospitalized, this is not acceptable. Mr. Speaker, this cry for help can't go unnoticed. So once I became aware of this situation, I immediately wrote a letter to the Premier to inform him of this serious matter. And I copied the letter to the Minister of Health and to the Minister responsible for Acadian Affairs. And I look forward to a reply to this important issue. And I hope that reply will come soon. Allow me to share with you one more story. This situation involved an 89-year-old lady who was transferred from the villa in Meteghan to the Yarmouth Hospital, where she remained for several months. Upon discharge, she could not return to the villa, which is actually in her own community, but was rather transferred to a long-term care facility in Granville Ferry outside of Annapolis Royal, 72 miles away from her home, and that's one way, according to her daughter. So here again, it's another situation where a Francophone was displaced from her culture. This 89-year-old lady has one living family member, her daughter. Her daughter was actually her caregiver before she was admitted to the villa. Her daughter made daily visits to visit her mom while she was a resident at the Meteghan Villa, which was just up the road. She told me that she used to drop in at least twice, sometimes 3 times a day to visit her mom. But now the family bonding has changed dramatically, and I must say not for the good. Her mother needs to try to communicate in a second language, which certainly cannot be easy for an 89-year-old lady. Her daughter daily visits have become weekly visits because of limited family income. Travel expenses are beyond their means. However, her daughter does her best to visit her mom because she recognizes her time with her mom is limited, especially the fact that her mom is 89 and she was severely sick not long ago. So it breaks her heart to see her mom so lonely among strangers. Even more, what's upsetting for her daughter to understand is her mom worked all her life. She paid taxes all her life, hoping one day when she retired that the government would be there to provide for her care. Again, her daughter is very disgusted with the current system, which prevents her from being with her 89-year-old mom at a time which is most critical for the both of them. So, Mr. Speaker, this long-term care facility placement policy needs to have a human touch and show some compassion, dignity, and understanding, especially to our Francophone seniors. Mr. Speaker, allow me to share with you one more story. A 91-year-old lady, which I have known for a long time, who was transferred from hospital to a nursing home in Granville Ferry, again near Annapolis Royal. She was transferred in early July till she passed away in late August. This remarkable lady lived all her life in Clare with her family of 5. She loved her Acadian heritage. She was involved in many local Acadian organizations promoting our Acadian culture. I can recall seeing this lady, Mr. Speaker, all dressed up in her Evangeline costume at many Acadian cultural events over the years. She truly loved her Acadian roots. However, looking back, where she was placed for the last 2 months of her life, makes me wonder. Makes me wonder how she felt being away from her Acadian culture and her own little Acadie called home. I'm sure it was an emotional turmoil for her as well as it was for her family. This lady was very proud of her Acadian roots and of her language, her French language. Another situation that has been brought to my attention is the following: not being called by your proper name, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, French names are sometimes difficult to pronounce, or yet some individuals have 2 names. You know, someone might not consider this to be a valuable concern, but I do. And I'll give you an example. You know, for someone being called Jean-Pierre, it's not Jean, it's not Pierre, it's not John, it's not Peter, it's Jean-Pierre. You know, they've been called Jean-Pierre all their life. Or Marie-Claire, it's not Mary, it's Marie-Claire or Mary-Claire. So again, for some people it might not be a big concern, but for some people they are. I know my time is up, Mr. Speaker. I hope that the government, that the minister will seriously give some consideration in reviewing the placement policy and give some consideration to the points that I have raised. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member. We'll now recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Honourable Member for Clare for bringing forward this resolution this evening. Therefore, be it resolved that government review its long-term care facility placement policies. The fact, Mr. Speaker, is that we are in the process of reviewing those policies, and the issues that were brought forward to the House this evening by the Honourable Member are a very important part of that review. The descriptions given by the Honourable Member are descriptions of situations that we as Nova Scotians need to work very hard to find ways of avoiding circumstances such as that when it comes to the placement of individuals within nursing homes. And I'm not going to repeat all of the points made by the Honourable Member. He made those points very effectively. However, it is important for him to understand that we want to address this situation. We want to ensure that circumstances such as those described by the honourable member are at a minimum, if not entirely eliminated as we do business. I'm very reluctant to say that we can reach a stage where it'll always be entirely eliminated, but we can do much better than we have been doing in the past. We're about 4 years into the single entry process now, and the time for a review is appropriate, and the time to address the issues raised by the honourable member are very appropriate as well. This was a matter of discussion and question period today, and while I know honourable members opposite want to have specific dates and times with respect to when things would happen, because they know that the issues are there and they want to see instant solutions, and we want to see solutions as well, but we want to make sure that they are solutions that are appropriate and will work. So it is within that context then that the review is occurring, and very much appreciate the input from the honourable member opposite, as well as the official opposition who have engaged in this discussion today as well. I indicated earlier in question period that the minister responsible for Acadian Affairs has raised this issue with me and with officials within the Department of Health. So there are other circumstances that we need to address as well with respect to single entry. We want to be able to do a better job, for instance, of ensuring that spouses are able to get together as quickly as possible in nursing homes when both require the services provided by nursing homes. And we want to find ways to ensure that that separation is kept to a minimum. It's again very difficult circumstance to be able to always say that you're going to have 2 beds in a room where you can put a couple together right away. It's not going to work that way, but it's a question of priorities, and it's a question of how the single entry is applied relative to those priorities. So we want to ensure that we're working in that direction with respect to these issues. So as I indicated, the process is underway, and we will be bringing forward recommendations to deal with that. It happens that in this particular summer, the circumstances illustrated by the honourable member were somewhat compounded by the fact that 15 beds, I believe in Ville Saint-Joseph, were out of commission as a result of a renovation that was taking place in that facility, and that made the challenges more difficult, because those beds, while not in the community of Clare, at least it was a facility where the language and the culture would have been opportunities for individuals to use and express themselves in their language and be exposed to culture were more available than in other circumstances where individuals had to move further afield in order to be accommodated. But that is not to say that you know, the bringing back of those 15 beds is in fact going to cure the problem. It isn't. It's a matter of how we apply the policy as we move forward. This is also an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, for us to look at just some of the more recent accomplishments that we have achieved with respect to the long-term care sector. And if we go to this spring's budget, I was able to announce specific initiatives that support families with continuing care needs. This year, the province allotted $246 million toward long-term care, a $50 million increase over last year, and $128 million to home care. We have committed $1.5 million to open 25 nursing home beds in Cape Breton. $1.65 million is helping to establish 50 new restorative beds to increase access to the appropriate type of care patients need. And with $750,000 this year, we were able to increase the scope of home care services. And of course, the more home care services we can provide, the longer we can keep individuals within their homes, and that, of course, eases the pressure with respect to the long-term care sector. And a new self-managed care program for individuals with disabilities will be introduced this year with $500,000 in new funding. And all of these are a testament to our commitment to seniors in Nova Scotia. Nursing homes, residential care facilities, and community-based options are three types of homes within long care. And I'm sure the honourable member would agree that these homes provide essential health services and comfort to thousands of individuals and families. We're working hard to advance the long-term care system in our province. We're developing policies and changing programs to in response to the ideas and concerns we have heard from residents, their families, seniors groups, and other Nova Scotians. Advancing long-term care is dependent on this input, as well as on researching best practices and international standards and approaches. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Health is using all possible resources to develop the kind of long-term care system that Nova Scotians need. We are taking a new direction in long-term care, one which supports independence, fairness, equity, and choice. And those principles need to be applied in the circumstances raised by the honourable member with respect to the issue of culture. This direction can be illustrated with action, Mr. Speaker. In January 1 of 2005, the government implemented a new approach to funding long-term care in Nova Scotia. And all members know we began paying for the health care costs for people in long-term care and implemented a whole range of new policies. And members are familiar with the consequences of those initiatives. Mr. Speaker, we can, I've addressed the issue with respect to placement and what it is that we want to do, and we want to do that within the long-term plan for continuing care. And the Speaker's indicated I have a minute remaining, and I will just use that minute to summarize the fact that we have had 1,400 people attended continuing care public consultations and focus group meetings across the province and who submitted comments in writing. And with this input and with the consultation, not just from individual Nova Scotians, but as well as from all of the professionals involved in the long-term care sector, we feel that with this consultation, we will be able to come forward with a program which will address, first of all, keeping citizens in their homes longer. Secondly, ensuring that we have the right number of long-term care beds in the appropriate places within the province, and that we have the appropriate spectrum of care provided with facilities throughout the province. And that, Mr. Speaker, is the objective of the consultation, and I look forward to receiving its recommendations and setting out the steps we will take in order to implement those recommendations. And high on that priority list will be addressing the single entry access so that it respects cultural issues for individuals. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, thank you, Mr. Minister. I'll now recognize the honourable member from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to start, I guess, with the last point from the Minister. I had a chance to attend one of the continuing care seminars back in August in my area in Cole Harbour. I might say that holding consultations in HRM in the middle of the summer probably wasn't the best idea, but there were some good ideas that did come out of it, so I just want to make that note. But I do want to thank the member from Clare for bringing this up, because it is an important point, one that is obviously near and dear to his heart. He deals with his constituents on a regular basis and the issues that they face. And this is an ongoing concern, Mr. Speaker, throughout Nova Scotia. The Francophone and Acadian communities in Nova Scotia have always received the short end of the stick. They have always, let's face it, for centuries been treated in many cases like second-class citizens. Their language only on a federal level has been recognized as an official language, and only through the Constitution Act of 1982 do we actually have some services for education that then can be provided to them. It was only in 1982 that they were guaranteed the right to minority rights with regard to education. But there are still many services in the province, in fact the vast majority of services that come under provincial jurisdiction. And this is something that this province has been loath to try and address, even in places where clearly there is a demand for the services. No one's asking where there's only a couple of Francophone families to provide full services, but where you have in places like Meteghan or Cheticamp or Richmond or industrial Cape Breton. I know full well from my relatives in New Waterford, there are still many Francophones living in parts of industrial Cape Breton. Many of them now seniors. Many of them who came down there during the 1930s and 40s to work in the coal mines and work in the steel mill, Mr. Speaker. There are many Francophones in that area. And now in HRM, we see a growing population of Francophones. Many Acadian, obviously, coming from the smaller communities throughout the province, Pubnico, Meteghan, Ponquet. Mr. Speaker, these people are moving to Halifax, but also there are many Francophones from other parts of Atlantic Canada, particularly northern New Brunswick, Moncton, and also many involved in the military who have moved. I know that my colleague from Dartmouth East, probably 10 or 15% of her actual constituency is Francophone because it's become a magnet, her area, because she has the Carrefour High School and she has Bois Joli Elementary School, which are Francophone schools. So these are issues that are arising in Nova Scotia. They have been in place. They have been concerns. Now we see that Francophones and Acadians for the first time are demanding services. And that, in many ways, is a good sign. The fact that we are here debating this tonight, in 7.5 years of my being in this House, it's not very often we've had much opportunity to actually debate on the ground key issues with regard to services for Francophones. And I think it's great that we're actually having this debate. And what's important, though, Mr. Speaker, is that what we haven't done is gone from acknowledging that there's a problem to trying to address it on a systemic basis. We can try and say that on an ad hoc basis we'll fix this problem or we'll fix that problem. But the fact is, in Nova Scotia, we need to recognize and we need to face the fact that there are 5 or 6% of our population speaks French as a first language, and therefore they have to be provided with the services. It's only right, it's only compassionate, it's only providing the dignity they deserve, given it's one of the 2 founding languages of our country. Mr. Speaker, with regard to long-term care, I think we all know that there are some long-term care facilities, specifically in places where there are substantial Francophone communities, whether it's in Clare, Pubnico, Yarmouth, Cheticamp, Richmond, where you do have, Richmond County, where you do have long-term care facilities where French is spoken, either as one of 2 languages or as the primary language. And in those places, the services are provided. What we have tonight is a debate about an issue that comes up when those facilities are full. And under the single entry system, they can be provided, I think, within 100 kilometers. They can go to any other facility in that district health authority. And as a result, Mr. Speaker, you end up having potentially them being put into long-term care facilities where no one speaks French. And the culture shock, particularly as my colleague from Clare pointed out, particularly for people with issues of dementia, Alzheimer's, where they may be reverting back to their mother tongue. People who, frankly, did not speak English. They grew up in communities where French was the primary and in many cases the only language. And if they do speak English, obviously, when you are in pain or when you are suffering, as people may tend to do in long-term care facilities, they may not be able to speak that second language. And I think it's important that we recognize this fact and recognize the fact that culturally it's important that they be able, in the last years of their lives, to be provided with the services they need in their own language. But let me be clear, that's not just long-term care facilities. This Department of Health needs to talk about its acute care. If you go to a hospital in this province, are you guaranteed that there's going to be someone in that hospital, a physician, a nurse, who's going to be able to speak to you in French? I don't think you are guaranteed that. What about home care? Do you have the ability, if you are able to leave the hospital and you're going home, to access home care in your language? Probably not. These are issues that need to be dealt with through a systemic change within the Department of Health. Last year, we passed the French Language Services Act, and it was unanimously adopted. And we saw in this House the support of every one of the 52 members in this House, Mr. Speaker, people saying, this is important. This is important. For the first time, we saw all three parties agree that it was important that French language services be provided and that this province begin to recognize the need to provide those, Mr. Speaker. The problem is, the first time we have a legitimate issue arising, not just a broad policy of, yeah, it's a good idea, motherhood, it's a good idea to provide French services. When it comes down, when the rubber hits the road, Mr. Speaker, we have a situation where the Department of Health, a year after we passed that law, is still not able to deal with what is probably a problem that should be addressed. Now, the minister could have gotten up and said, here's our plan. In the next 5 years, we intend to ensure that there are bilingual staff in every long-term care facility in Nova Scotia. That we will make sure there's staff of people who are bilingual, or we will make sure that we provide the training to ensure there are people who are bilingual. We're not saying that we have to have francophone long-term care facilities throughout the province. Obviously, that would be great in places where it's warranted. But why the minister can't get up and say, either in question period or here in debate, why he can't say that we have a plan in the next 5 years to get to the point where we're going to have bilingual staff in these facilities. To me, that would begin to address the system, address the systemic nature of the problem, and would ensure that we would actually have in place in all of these facilities. So in my riding, where I have maybe 2 or 3% of my population is francophone, yes, predominantly francophone Quebecois or Franco-Ontarian because they're in the military. But if they choose to retire here and they want to access a long-term care facility, I have one in my riding, Ocean View Manor. I'm not sure who's there who speaks French. Frankly, it's not an issue that's come up with me. It's not an issue that's come up in my riding, but it will someday. And frankly, there needs to be a recognition that if we respect the rights of those who speak French in our province, recognizing it as one of the 2 founding languages of our country, as the first people, first Europeans to settle in this province, in this area, Mr. Speaker, it's important that we recognize that fact and we recognize that they be provided with the services. And let's be frank, beyond the places like Shedikan and Richmond County and Meteghan and Pubnico and Yarmouth, the largest francophone population in this province is in HRM. Yes, they are a small part of the general population, maybe 5, maybe 6, maybe 7%. I'm not sure the exact number. But the fact is, Mr. Speaker, that they will also need to access those services, whether it's at the QE2 or Ocean View Manor or home care. The fact is that they need access to those services in their language as well. And this minister has not, and seems to not be able to, provide us with answers as to how he thinks this is going to be done. We actually put into the legislation, thankfully, I might add, if there was any ever doubt, this incident proves to me why we did it, that it's going to be mandatory for the government to pass regulations implementing French language services within the government, I think by 2006, I think, or end of 2006. And Mr. Speaker, given that, this minister's going to have to do something. I just wish he would have been able today, instead of talking in broad strokes about reviewing long-term care or continuing care, recognizing the fact that cultural and particularly French language issues need to be addressed. Mr. Speaker, in a way that ensures that these people have access to it. Whether they're obviously when they're in places like Meteghan or Clare or Pubnico or Shedikan, it's important that they do have it. In many cases, they do now. But we need to make sure that it's there when they need it. But also for francophones throughout this province, they need to know that the healthcare system is there for them and they can access it in their own language, Mr. Speaker. That's something that this government has not committed to. That's not something this government has not acknowledged, either here tonight, either here today in question period, or ever. And that would be the step I would like to see, because it takes that, we're talking culture, let's talk about a cultural change within government, beginning to recognize that French language services need to be a part of its planning whenever it is designing programs, whether it's healthcare, education, community services. It doesn't take a lot, given today's level of bilingualism in this province, to ensure that there is staff that are bilingual wherever people access information within government. And I think that that would be what we need in order to fix this system. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. The time for debate has expired, and thank all the honourable members for their participation. And the House will meet again tomorrow at 2 p.m.